Stay informed with Pacific Mornings.
Nisa Bolivinaka Ta'alofa Lava. Welcome back to Pacific Mornings on 5:31 PI. The time is 37 minutes past 8. I'm your guest host, Saina Lava Sanile Chadwick. At the Pacific, many births and deaths go unrecorded. This can have serious consequences for people's rights to access and services. Governments and international organisations have pledged to improve civil registration systems with the goal of ensuring every Pacific Islander is officially recognised. Program Lead for Civil Registration and Vital Statistics at SPC, Jeff Montgomery, joins us now live. Welcome to the show.
Yandra, good morning.
How many births and deaths go unrecorded in the Pacific?
Well, at the moment, we're estimating that over 1 million children in the Pacific have not had their births registered and will not have their births registered until at least they turn 5 years old. So this is a significant problem. We've recently come through a decade of working to improve civil registration across Asia and the Pacific. And unfortunately, in the Pacific, there has been no improvement, unlike in our neighbouring Asian countries where there's been significant improvement.
1 million children, you say?
At least 1 million children, and that's based on the information we've had from the 22 countries and territories in the Pacific.
What impact does that have on the person not registering their birth?
Well, it has a significant impact on both the individual but also the wider community. So if you don't have a birth certificate, you're going to be unable to get a passport. You may be unable to open a cell phone account in your country. You may be unable to register for school. So there's lots of things that birth registration and death registration bring to individuals. But also, just as importantly, it brings information to the government and non-government organisations about the population of your country. So information about how many schools need to be built, how many hospitals there are needed, what kind of businesses might open in a country, all relies on having a good understanding of the population, both the current population, but also the future population in a country.
So a super important thing to do is make sure you register a birth. What are some of the obstacles or barriers facing people to get that birth registered?
Well, there's a range of barriers. Often it's just information. It's just knowing that it's important. You know, parents are really busy. A new baby's just arrived. They're probably not really thinking about going down to the local office and registering the baby. And in some countries, it does require you to go into the office. And if you've a newborn child on your hip, you may not want to travel a couple of hours into town to register your baby at the local office. You may not want to queue up for 3 or 4 hours in the hot sun waiting to do that. So there's physical barriers to registration. Also, in some countries, there's a cost, a financial cost. We always advocate that birth registration should be free, and in most countries in the Pacific, that is the case. But sometimes you have to pay to get the birth certificate, and some families might struggle to do that. And then in some countries, there's a range of other practical issues. You know, the power might not be working in the local registration office. There may be insufficient staff in the office. So there's a whole range of reasons why in many of our Pacific countries, you know, birth registration rates can be quite low.
What happens when someone doesn't register a birth right away and then they might register it a few days or weeks later? How do they manage to find the correct birth date? I imagine there might be some discrepancies with when the child was actually born and when they were registered. Does that play a role at all? Do you see that happening?
It does happen. Ideally, the birth has been captured by the local health organisation, be it the hospital or family health centres. So often they will have a record of the birth having occurred, and then that needs to be passed on to the registration office, which is often at the Ministry of Justice or Internal Affairs or somewhere like that. So getting that record passed from the health system over to the registration system can be a challenge. And more often than not, the family are asked to take that record with them, but to take a piece of paper from the hospital and then take it to the registration office. And sometimes that piece of paper gets lost.
And I imagine this is the same for registering a death as well? Sort of same issues there?
Absolutely. And in fact, it's a bigger problem in the Pacific, death registration. In many countries, there's no real advantage to the family of registering the death unless there's land involved that might need to be passed from one generation to another. But that death information, particularly the cause of death information, is vital for local planning of health facilities and responding to crises such as pandemics.
I imagine also registering a death, if you're on some sort of pension or allowance, you've got to make sure that's rightfully, I guess, terminated as well. I guess that can cause some issues if someone's still deemed to be alive and receiving some monetary gain from that and their death hasn't been registered. I can assume there's some issues with that as well.
Well, yes, there are. And what it can mean is that if the money is continuing to be paid, then the family may have a debt that they owe back to government once the death is registered. But also for countries that have got, low incomes, paying pensions to people who have passed away is not the best use of the limited funds that that country has. So it's really important for the government and for the rest of the community that those deaths are registered and those pension payments are rightfully stopped.
100%. Jeff, Asia and the Pacific have made a pledge to ensure all births are registered and all deaths recorded by 2030. That's not too far away. How realistic do you think that goal is?
Well, for some countries, it's quite realistic. So for Kiribati, for example, they're currently at 90% of births registered. So conceivably, getting Kiribati to 100% is not too difficult. Other countries in our region, it's going to be a lot of work. So Vanuatu, for example, 17% of babies are registered. Papua New Guinea, it will be less than that.
Wow.
Samoa, only 64% of babies are registered within 5 years of birth. So in many of our countries, we've got a lot of work to do. And that's the reason that the Bloomberg Data for Health Initiative has funded the Pacific Community, or SPC, to work with all of our countries to improve their birth registration.
I mean, this has a massive impact on government initiatives, right? If you don't have the correct population number or the correct number of babies born, then you can't make the best decisions as a government if you don't have access to that data, right?
That's absolutely right. And for some of our countries, Papua New Guinea is a good example, unfortunately. The government doesn't really know how many people are in the country. There's a census that happens occasionally, but they don't know how many babies are born every week. They don't know how many people die every week. So it's really difficult to know exactly how many people are in Papua New Guinea. And if you ask someone from Papua New Guinea how many people live in their country, they will say between 8 to 10 million. They're not exactly sure, and that's because the birth registration and the death registration systems aren't working well. And then they can't plan hospitals, schools, roads, all of those important things that are based on the number of people in your country.
Wow, that's insane. And on that note, what do you say to countries or people who haven't registered either a birth or death, just to give them a sense of how important it is that people do it? What is your message?
Well, the main message, particularly for birth registration, is about the future of your child. It's making sure that they're well set up to flourish in the future, that they can access schools, that if they want to, they can access universities overseas, that they can get a passport, that they can join the national rugby team. All of these things require a birth certificate from your country. So for your child's future, getting that child registered is so important. Also,
Ma-
on the death end of the spectrum, it's about making sure that your loved one has been counted, that their cause of death is known, and hopefully future deaths can be prevented as a result of the information that they have shared with their country.
Malo Alpito, Jeff, appreciate your time for coming on the show this morning and explaining to us just how important it is that we do get our births and deaths recorded.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much. Whanaka.
That was